Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the show. My goodness, do we have an episode for you today all around power. I've certainly been journeying with this myself, as I mentioned in the episode on the run up to recording this, so it's a potent one. And we've been creating some very exciting things in the background. We've got a new powerful team, which I've had to make very conscious and powerful intentional choices around. And they have been creating some of our beautiful content and sharing all the magic. So I'm very excited to share. We are creating some gorgeous, magical, lunar-based masterclasses and rituals called Lunar Mystery Classes, and they're all centered around some of the common fears and challenges and problems that you will experience as a woman discovering her soul gifts. That is who we're here to serve, those who are discovering their soul gifts and wanting to birth that work into the world. So if that is you, we're also very much diving into all the magical technologies because we know that that is what you women want. So join us for one of our Lunar Mystery Classes. Check them out. There's a whole year's worth of schedule at www.nicolebarton.co.uk/mystery class. And if that's not enough, we've also been working on something very, very special. If you haven't seen already, we have an upcoming group crucible based around Naja. Naja is a remedy that I mentioned in this episode. Actually, it's all around owning our self-expression, and there's a very good reason why we would want to do that as magical women, bringing our soul purpose into the world. For a start, it helps us to own our power from love, which is what we're going to be speaking to in this episode, but it also helps us to show up vulnerably and truthfully, and in doing so will help us to learn how to magnetize our deepest desires, but also our soul clients. So if that is calling to you, Naja is the snake. She's all around sensual, feminine energy. Join us and take a look. It's www.nicolebarton.co.uk/Naja. That said, let's dive into the episode. On The Secret Witch Show today, I dive into the topic of owning our power, vulnerably sharing my journey of integrating my power from love and the nuance of owning our heart-led feminine magical power instead of the culturally accepted masculine power we perceive power to be about. In this episode, I explored the importance of making a conscious choice to own our power and some of the key shadow work and soul work enquiries and practices that help us to heal our fear of our power, offering a rich inquiry to help you own your truthful power from love. Let's dive in. Hello, welcome to the show, and today we are talking about healing the fear of our power and owning our power from love, which I have been saying since I started this podcast that I would speak to. And it's so magically timed and perfectly chosen by our Secret Witch Society that this is a topic this week, because it feels like this week I am arriving at a real kind of crescendo into truly owning my power. And that's really been the journey for me this whole time that I've been in the work of soul. So it's a topic that has a great deal of meaning for me. It's a topic that I have embodied like deeply, but it's also an area where I still have my own work, because power for me, and this is why I'm here to serve the archetype of the witch who represents power. Power to me is really the wound in my lifetime that I came here to alchemize. So it's magically timed and synchronous that this is exactly the wounding that I am journeying with myself as I share on this. And that said, I've also got a great deal of embodiment in the archetype of what you could call the queen. What we also work with in archetypal apothecary is the remedy aurum, which is gold. And I'll speak to that a little bit more. But essentially, it's an archetype I'm really embodied in, aurum, as an archetypal remedy. And so it's really synchronous. It's really perfectly timed. And one of the things that I will say is that it's almost magically timed in that vulnerability is really the essence in truly owning our feminine power. And where I'm feeling right now as I share this is quite vulnerable. Like, owning my power is really present for me at the moment. And that's particularly, even this morning, I have been projecting my power onto, or lack of, onto a feeling of lack of, onto a guide of mine. And he's been mirroring back that I have to own my stuff rather than project. And it's really, really tough to navigate. So the fact that I'm now here talking about something which I have embodied to a large degree, and I'm just kind of going into an even deeper level, feels quite magical. And I'm seeing on an even deeper level, we do have to fully own our choices, particularly if we are here to live from soul and create soul businesses. So this is really present for me. And it's also something that I think is really helpful to share, that owning our power, owning our self-responsibility is going to involve going into the darkness. The work that we're here for, if we want to heal fear of our power and own our power from love, is really the going into the deep dark depths. This work is really about facing aspects of ourselves that we don't want to face. And in my case right now, even though probably largely everyone would say that they see me as extremely devoted, extremely committed, extremely owning my power, there are always deeper layers we can go. And at this point in time, owning my choices in business is particularly important. And it's particularly pertinent that we're talking about archetypal aurum. Aurum is gold. Aurum as a remedy is about power. It's essentially about owning our power, owning our sovereignty. Gold is very much associated with sovereignty. Owning our capacity to actually shine and be naturally brilliant. But Aurum's shadow kind of battles this sense of failure and this sense of vulnerability and this sense of being helpless or being a tyrant. And so to just speak to that, like the place where I'm feeling fear of my power at the moment is in a place where typically women who are walking this path are also feeling vulnerability, and where they can also feel the same kind of fears around power. And that's the vulnerability of the transition. It's clear that I've been, in this process for the last probably like 9 months of rebirth. And when I say rebirth, it's really an amalgamation of everything, a bringing together of everything that I've been birthing for the last 3 years. But it's really like bringing it together with precision. And I've really seen that in that process, even though I have journeyed with bringing a magical business into the world, with a degree of success in accordance to like mainstream's views, if we think about the money and things, all the trappings of successful soul business, I've created that, and there's still a vulnerability in leaning into this transition of birthing this on a deeper level. Like, I have made huge changes in my business, which have meant like owning really powerful choices to stop some of my one-to-one work. I've still got some clients that are journeying with me, but really reducing down areas where it would have been easy to not choose to do that. It would have been easy to choose the money. It would have been easy to choose to keep going with something that where in certain circumstances it wasn't aligned to keep having so many one-to-one clients, because I want to bring this to a bigger amount of people. And that's also going to take time. And so knowing that we have a sovereign, powerful choice to make into that, into the edginess of that, into making these huge changes in business. You know, I've also this week had to make the choice to restructure my team more powerfully, and that's involved making really powerful sovereign choices to release some people who were no longer aligned. And if I hadn't been able to do that with love, I would have really, really struggled. So this owning our power from love so that we can choose alignment is something that I'm really in the midst of and embodied in, and at the same time still feeling the wounding of. And what happens in the wounding when we are typically struggling with our fear of our power, we will typically swing on the shadow pole of power. And what that means is that can show up at either end of the spectrum. If we imagine there's a pole, and the pole, it represents power, and in the middle, it's not even about being in the middle, actually. That's probably a really unhelpful analogy, but let's just say that each end of the pole, because the aim is to like elevate beyond the pole, so the pole doesn't even exist anymore. But imagine at each end of the pole, you have two opposites of power, of the expression of power. And these are both shadow. On one end of the power shadow pole, we have helplessness. Women who are here to be powerful may not actually be able to see their power because they may be in shadow of their power, which has them feel helpless. If you are feeling helpless in your business, in your life, it's likely you're actually here with an essence of being powerful. At the opposite end of the scale, we have tyrant. Of course. Like, what's the extreme opposite of helpless? Dominance. So this is also in my own shadow, where I can often spend most of the time. You may find that hard to believe. But essentially my shadow, well, actually, no, that's not entirely true. I think I swing quite equally between the two now I'm thinking about it. But essentially you have the opposite end of helpless shadow pole of power is tyrant, dominance, like that kind of venomous snake-like energy whereby we just snap, everything's everyone's fault, and we become this persecutor. And that is also a sign that we are here to alchemize our power. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about that, because there's a whole dynamic about how we are taught power is in this world, in our culture, even in the world of self-help and self-development. And, you know, the wild woman archetype, that often is seen as, the kind of wild aspects, the rebellious aspects are often seen as this powerful thing. And yet, if we look at the shadow poles, which is, you know, the universal alchemical laws are the polar opposites, like the rebel vibe is still in the shadow of power. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a bit, but essentially where I've been at is very much in a cross between the helpless and the tyrant. I mean, I joke about this with my old soul guide, and we always used to, obviously this is how my path was developed, but essentially the archetypal remedies that we serve in this path are based around the archetypal remedies that I have been working with myself for the last 3 years and more, actually, because I've worked with them as homeopathic remedies before I developed archetypal apothecary. I've been working with them for probably a lifetime, essentially. I mean, I've probably taken many of them since I was age 10. So these are remedies that I'm particularly familiar with, and I always name when I was, getting into the work of shadow and like looking at these poles and seeing how they showed up as a mirror in my life, I would name each aspect of the shadow pole. And if we're thinking about the shadow pole of power, the helplessness one, the archetype of that end, is very much a remedy called pulsatilla. And the tyrant was snake. So in this archetypal apothecary path, we're probably talking like Naja in her venomous state. And so we always used to joke, me and my soul guide, I was like, okay, who's out to play today? Is it pulsatilla or is it Naja? And it's become a bit of a standing joke that actually what tends to happen is both pulsatilla and Naja tend to show up at once. So as you can imagine, it's not the best state to deal with someone in when they're expressing the shadow of both of these remedies. And that's very much where I have been this week. Feeling the fear of, can I birth this business? That helplessness element of pulsatilla, like, can I really birth this business? Even though I have created a successful business before, can I do this again? Like, should I just give up? This feels like hopeless. And that has been very present for me. I've also been in the Naja tyrant element of that, the venomous, like, well, I've hired this guide and, I'm in victim to their suggestions and all of this stuff, like giving away my power to others or to the universe or to whatever it is, and then being in victim to that and really like persecuting we're often, when we're in tyrant, we go into the persecutor. And in fact, that's probably a helpful analogy actually, is the victim triangle. When we talk about reclaiming our power, one of the ways that was really powerful for me in my own journey of reclaiming my power was this analogy of the victim triangle. If you've not heard of it before, I'd highly recommend looking up an article which I'll put in the show notes by Linda Graham called The Triangle of Victim, Rescuer and Persecutor, What It Is and How to Get Out. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that because essentially the victim triangle is a great lens to be able to notice where we are in victim. And all of these positions on this triangle are essentially us being out of our power in victim. And the three positions are persecutor, rescuer and victim. So we look at pulsatilla. Pulsatilla is clearly victim. She's like, oh my God, this is all terrible. I can never do this. I'm so helpless. I'm just not going to be able to do this. Like the real helpless, and I'm literally speaking to my shadow right now. That is very much the element of the victim triangle that pulsatilla occupies. When you think about Naja the tyrant, she is very much like, this is all your fault, I can't believe this has happened, really, really like cross, angry, that kind of rebellious, fuck you, I don't need you kind of vibe. That's clearly persecutor. So, but there's also like rescuer as well, which is also victim, which often is a more difficult one for women to spot. But the deeper work with this triangle is to begin to notice when we drop into each of these positions on the triangle, because it happens in all aspects of our life. So when we talk about reclaiming our power, this is about, in general, looking at our lives, not just our businesses, but like, how do we show up in life? Are we in victim? Are we in persecutor? Are we in rescuer? I'm going to speak to more about love in terms of that in a little while, but just share that as a lens because it's really helpful. It's actually a really great inquiry and practice to be in the work of looking where we are on the victim triangle. And the deepest work of all is to be able to illuminate that and begin to choose to move off the triangle. And that can take some really deep work, but it's essentially one of the things that helped me to completely transform and reclaim my power. If we talk about how to, heal our fear of our power, this is one of the biggest ways. And one of the places where I remember this showing up really clearly, and again, I know we're here mostly for women who are creating soul businesses, and really our soul business is just a mirror for the patterns that we have in life, the blocks that we have in life, the shadow that we have in life. So this, when we change this, when we choose into changing this and owning our power, we're really making a devotion to change this in all areas of life. And so one of the ways this showed up for me, at least first, when I was in this work, and there's been many a journey with reclaiming my power in business, but this is the example that came to mind as I was thinking about it before I started recording. And it was with my mum, and my mum is just gorgeous, and we have the most beautiful relationship now. But there were times where I used to feel that she was dictatorial, and I really began to see like she was in persecutor, largely because I was in victim. And that really, just seeing that dynamic and doing the deep work with that allowed me to choose differently. I remember sending a message that had been this long kind of persecutor rant at me. I remember sending a message back that was a real pattern interrupt, and the message was essentially loving her. Like no blame, no shame, just pure vulnerability. And I think it was something along the lines of, I really hear how you're feeling. I'm sorry that that's how you're feeling. And like, I really want to co-create this differently. Like just pure vulnerability, no defensiveness, no armour, because of course that's what we're doing when we're in persecutor, and really in victim as well. All of it is creating armour. But that really shifted the course of our entire relationship. And it sounds like something so small, but it's been different ever since. And that really is the power of owning our power, owning our responsibility. And I can see as I'm thinking about that example there, I'm just like, oh, it really is like, this is a call for me to like fully own my power in creating my business as well. So this is great to be it's like free therapy, coaching myself as we move through. But yeah, it's helpful when you're embodied in that to a degree to be able to coach yourself through that simply. But yeah, so, and this is also something, just to speak to the piece about guides that I was speaking to earlier, where I'm seeing that my tendency is to project my feeling of lack of power onto my guides and have them rescue me. Like I go into that victim space of like, this isn't working, rescue me. And it's also something, either that or tyrant. And it's also something that I've had women do to me, like women who I've been guiding, women in my crucibles have also projected onto me. And I share this because this is something that I have chosen into. Like, this is the work that I'm here for. I'm here to alchemize my own shadow, to come to a place where I can reclaim and own my power from love. And that includes being able to, the more I do that, that allows me to hold other women in their own projections. And that is something that I've consciously chosen. And I share that because I think it's really an important point. Like when we say we want to own our power, often women say it in a way that isn't really fully consciously chosen. Like they'll want the glory of it. They'll want the, we talk about goddess dress up quite a lot. There's this idea in the kind of typical woo light self-help world that we kind of, all we have to do is like put on a crown, wear a pretty dress and like claim that we're the queen. And that isn't what my work is about. My work is about actually really integrating this choice to own our power. And that will require, like if we're gonna dance around proclaiming we're a queen, that will bring in and call in all the healing responses, all the material for our liberation to show us where we are not embodied in that. And I think that's something that is, before we even go into the how, like if you are really here to reclaim your power, you have to be open and willing to actually see all the places where you actually benefit from not being in power. That was something that was huge to me, for me, was seeing that I had a kinky pleasure. I got a kinky pleasure out of staying in victim. And that's such a quite a bold statement, but like for me, when I don't own my power, I receive love from being in victim. I receive rescuing from being in victim. And there are real benefits to that. So we do have to consciously choose into liberating this if it's something that is aligned. And yeah, that's a really important point, and I think one for everybody who's listening to this. If it feels aligned to choose into practices and things and enquiries, there is that first inquiry of like, is this aligned to choose? Do I actually want to heal my power shadow and give up all the unconscious kinky pleasures and benefits that I get from it? So it could be good to firstly make a list of all the ways that you benefit from not being in your power. And as I mentioned, some of the ways that the kind of symptoms that power shadow shows up, I think that would be helpful to speak to, is like feeling helpless. We talked about archetypal apothecaries, pulsatilla shadow, not being able to, to feeling very in victim. And one of the things that happens, a kind of almost like manifestation of being in that place, is that often women can't even see, and I include myself, like when we're in that helpless place, we can't connect to what's possible for us. We can't see our heart's deeper vision. So this is one of the ways that it costs us. These are kind of the symptoms. Like when we're in our tyrant, when we're in our Naja shadow, our venomous expression, like we're creating ruptures in our relationships and disconnection. We're creating arguments, we're creating, projecting our emotions onto people. We're also disconnecting from our true selves. And all of this is the kind of costs and consequences. So once you've made your list of benefits of kinky pleasures and benefits that you get from not being in your power, it's also helpful to look at the sorts of ways that not being in your power costs you. Like there's also the fact that when we're in that helpless expression, and even when we're in the kind of venomous expression, like it means that we're not taking aligned action. We're very much distracted in the shadow of power rather than being clean and able to take aligned action. We're also not expressing our truth. Like we're still hiding parts of ourselves, because really all of this is a mask, is armor. And yeah, even another expression is like beating ourselves up. So even if we're not being tyrant outwardly, if we're not being Naja outwardly and venomous, often we will turn our venom inwards and start beating ourselves up for not creating what we say we want to create, for not owning our power. And of course, wherever we're suppressing, we're burning out. Like if we are not free-flowing, powerful energy, because really essentially power is another word for energy. If we are suppressing our power by being either helpless or tyrant, we are not expressing the fullness of our power. So therefore we're not fully energized. Like literally this sucks our life force. Like power equals energy. It's another word for energy. So if you are burned out, it's a good sign again that this is a symptom of your power shadow. And I know that we came here for today to know how to heal power shadow. So that is the deeper question. And I've given some inquiries already that will be really serving. But like I say, firstly, that conscious choice. I think the conscious choice needs to be made. Are you actually here to alchemize this? If you are, you'll likely know. And it's helpful to choose that fully by being aware of the costs and benefits. Now, the next piece that's important, and I'm going to go more into all of that in terms of like how we heal our power shadow. But firstly, I just want to speak to the love element, because that was part of the kind of what we're here to speak about in this episode. And that is kind of like the core ingredient. Like love is the core element in alchemizing our power. And the reason why I say this, and there's a really important point to make here, because one of the things that I've noticed in the women that come to work with me or walk the path with me is that we have this idea of what power is. Like we have this conditioned idea of what power is, and typically that is very masculine and mundane lens. So things like, harsh, fierce, rebellious, controlling often are words that women associate with the word power. And that is very different to how I view power. And the reason is because I've done a lot of work into the feminine and magical lens, and the way that I see feminine power and magical power very differently to the way that it's seen in our society and our culture, the way we've been conditioned to see power, is the power from the feminine, from magic, is loving, truthful, vulnerable, and heart-led. So love, essentially, is the alchemical piece in reclaiming our feminine power. And another useful inquiry in terms of the how to heal our power shadow is, how does power feel to you as you know it currently? Like, what words come up when you think about power? I think that's another great inquiry for you to start with, like beginning to see like how much healing there is in terms of like alchemizing your feminine power. And so the how to heal our fear of power is love. And that also includes loving ourselves more deeply. When we are doing shadow work, when we are here to go into the deep, dark depths of shadow, one of the things that often is missing in other people's paths, and again, this is very much in reference to these like wild power, kind of rebellious paths, is this piece about self-love. And loving ourselves more deeply in our power wounds is the way to alchemy, but that requires us to really love ourselves. To see our shadow, we're only going to be able to see it if we're able to love ourselves. So the more deeply we can hold this with love and go into it lightly and playfully and be like, okay, little girl, what are you going to show us? Like, I'm here to love you. Like, and hold it lightly and tenderly, the more we're going to see. And this is again coming back to that piece about like, we truly have to be willing to look honestly but lovingly and vulnerably into our hearts and see what our relationship with power is like. The other piece that I wanted to speak to is that something that I've been seeing again, like it's going back to this piece about goddess dresser, about wild reclamation, is that I've really been feeling this recently. I have to say, this is another thing that I'm journeying with, is this feeling that the coaching industry itself is not loving. It really like has this kind of ownership of power in a really rebellious way. And I look through, like, you know, I scroll down Instagram and I just see post after post where there's this kind of rebel vibe, and that just really does not sit well in my cells. Like, it does not sit well in my cells to have this kind of rebellious power. That is not coming from love. And in honesty, it makes it really hard for something I've noticed that my women and women who walk this path or feel called to this path really, really struggle with, is trust. Trust of their guide, ultimately, but ultimately the deeper piece here is trust of themselves. And in my mind, it feels like there's something here around the coaching industry, for the coaching industry, because likely, and I have also been here, largely when we're in the self-development lens, we have experienced this owning of power in a rebellious way, but not from love, not from truth. And so that has us start to mistrust the process, mistrust the self-development world, mistrust our guides and their intentions. And it's something that showed up for me in my journey, and something that I have alchemized, and as I mentioned, I'm still alchemizing, but something that I had a really beautiful lesson over with my own guide, and also that I've journeyed with women who work one-to-one with me as well. And it's something that is really present to me at the moment, that there's this kind of loving piece missing, and it's really, really important for me because I'm here to serve truth, right? So I need to serve that in the most loving way possible. It's also something, there's a reason, you know, this is a reason why I rarely talk about money in my marketing. Because that money is often tied in with power. And if I start talking about money, that would kind of call in other women who were really here for the wrong reasons. They're kind of, if our focus is money and I start calling in intentionally people wanting to create more money, that is really kind of seeking the masculine power that I'm not offering. And that's not to say, just to caveat this, that's not to say we don't create money in this path. Like, there's evidence that we create money when we choose our power from love and choose soul. And it's still a valid vision and desire. Like, that's really important for me to have you know. Like, it's not that we're bypassing money. It's not that we're saying we're not going to create money in abundance in this work. We are. But the way that I have seen money is created is by first and foremost owning our power. And that's creating money from alignment. So that is intentionally why I rarely talk about money in my marketing. And that very much ties into the piece about power being the most important thing, and power from heart, power from love. So it's a path that I'm creating that requires us to first and foremost powerfully choose soul and make sovereign choices to reclaim our power from our wounds. And what I mean by not talking about money in my marketing is that also the big thing here is that fully owning our power is to really have service be the focus. And I think this is the thing about the coaching industry that is really really grating on me at the moment. It's like this sense of falseness, this sense of like, come here, own your power, earn loads of money from like this rebellion. And for me, that just doesn't feel authentic, because the way that I know that we do create money and that we own our power and that we create from truth and alignment is by owning that from service, from heart-led, from being heart-led, from fully owning our magical and feminine power. And this is the exact reason why I do what I do. And it really is something that I'm journeying with at the moment in terms of like that real service focus. Like, every time I come back to like, why am I doing this? It's because I'm here for heart-led service and to also initiate women into that themselves, not the kind of rebellious owning of power in the goddess dress-up world. Like, to me, that isn't truth. That is armor. It's in the Naja expression, shadow expression of the power kind of shadow pole. And this is the exact reason why I do what I do. And, you know, sometimes that choice, that devotion to power and sovereignty has me on my knees. Like at the moment, I'm like feeling in that, you know, that deep power shadow. And there's also a power in that too. Like, there's a lesson in that too. So let's talk more about what does owning our power from love mean. Now, what that looks like really is, I'm going to call it owning our sovereign truth. When we are owning our power from love, it means we are literally showing up clean. We're showing up clean of shadow. We're showing up in our truth. We're showing up in our power, and cleanly, when I say cleanly, I mean free of shadow, expressing what is in our hearts, the truth. And this requires us to pause, to really look at the wounding that is coming up for us if we are triggered. If we're activated, if we're triggered, this is a good time for us, if we're going to truly own our power, to pause, to look at what stuff is in the way, and almost like cleaning our shadow out. Like, hilariously, I looked at my notes and I wrote Sharon cleaning instead of shadow cleaning. So we've got to clear all our Sharons out. Their shadow, clear our shadow. Yeah, essentially getting as clean as possible on what is in the way of us showing up from loving heart-led truth and coming purely from loving service and truth. And yeah, at the moment, that's a great example of where I'm at, like still showing up and serving, being on my knees, devoted to soul, devoted to being of service, to sharing my message, to sharing what my soul has called me to share, and trusting that that is going to create my vision. And it takes a huge amount of vulnerability to truly own our power from love, to not be in the armor of the rebel vibe, to truly just express what's in our hearts, like the vulnerability, the fear, and own that from love. And I feel like quite emotional, actually. So I was just chatting to her this morning. I feel so honoured and so forever grateful for the privilege that I have had of working with a soul guide who modelled the utmost loving sovereignty to me. And I was reflecting on this the other day and just like burst into tears of like the absolute magic of the transformation that it created for me in working with her to alchemize this. I can't even tell you of all the magical technology that I have worked with. The piece about owning my power has literally transformed my life, and it is some of the hardest work that I've ever done. Like, in fact, it's not even some of the hardest, it is the hardest work I've ever done. And yeah, it's just why I bring it to the world, because for me, like, passing on that legacy, that lineage of like, this is how we own our power from love, from the feminine, from magic, like that is just going to ripple out into the world and create so much change. And I've had the privilege of that, and also I've had guides that have just owned their power not from love. So I can really feel in my cells the importance of owning our power from love, and that is the speaking of truth for love. And that's not necessarily niceness, that's a little bit different. That's probably more the people pleasing piece. Like, it's not, when we add in love, it's like the honouring, the respect, the just the underlying energetic of love. When we can arrive at that place and see what's there for us to own before we respond to people, that's so powerful. And it's funny as well, magically timed, I have been doing my lunar mystery classes at the moment, and I wrote down a short LM. And up until now, because homeopathy is the lineage of my path, and I talk about potency and how I share energetically. I'm not a homeopath anymore. I essentially dose the remedies as archetypal transmissions. So it's like energetic transmissions that we're working with in this path. And until now, I've always kind of served them. If you don't know about homeopathy, there's different levels of potency, and there's like the low level, which is like C, and then there's higher level, which is M, and then there's like a higher level than that, which is LM. And so I was looking at this LM shorthand on my piece of paper, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I realised, like, typically the lower potency is, quite low dose. It's not going to create lots of aggravation, lots of material for liberation. So I tend to serve that if I'm like serving something in, say, the lunar mystery classes, because that's something that's going to activate a little bit, but not fully have you go into like, oh my goodness, like this archetypal remedy is here in my life and she's going to like absolutely tear me to pieces for the good of your power. Whereas the deeper crucibles will be serving more like an M potency, so like the higher potency until now. And I then realised, oh my goodness, like LM potency is essentially power from love. Like, it's the potency that is like super high. It's like the most powerful potency you can get of archetypal remedies. And still, it's also the gentlest. It's the one that you would give to reduce healing responses, to reduce material for liberation. And it got me thinking, like, wow, this is literally the embodiment of power from love. So I realised, actually, I haven't been dosing the M potency, I've been dosing the LM potency. And my deep work is to continue to dose that power from love. And when I talk about dosing, I'm really meaning serving the archetypal apothecary remedies for you to work with. Through all the work that I'm doing, there's always like an underlying energetic archetypal remedy that I'm transmitting. and energetically. And so my work is to transmit in my crucibles LMs, power from love. Now, I thought that was quite magical, given again I was here to talk about that today. So we get into the how now, and again, like the work of magic, there's never a prescribed how, and it's something that often women will come to me and be like, okay, I want the logical path, because we're used to there being this logical linear path. And I'm always like, if you're asking me a how question, I'm not going to answer, but there is a relevance to it. So I'm going in, I'm meeting women in that, like, wanting the logical answer. And like, really essentially the how is the shadow work piece, the noticing what our stories are around power, where we resist our power. So if there's a question that you want to reflect on, some of the ones that I've been providing as we've dotted through this episode, like, note those down, and like, those are some good questions to, essentially those are the questions that are the shadow work. And then also archetypal work, other ways that we can do this. Archetypal work, the witch herself is a symbol of power. This is why all of my work is centered around the witch. I am essentially the witch. She is a symbol of feminine power. What can she show us? Like, we can work with the archetypal witch as a lens to reclaim our power and see, like, where do we feel like resistance to that? Where do we feel the juiciness of, like, oh no, repulsion to the witch and her power? The other thing that we can do is work with spirit. And I was reminded of this again this week, like, there's such a power in connecting to our guides, in connecting to nature. Just returned from a gorgeous camping trip for bank holiday, and the power of being in nature is so revolutionary. And also, working with our guides, I had funnily enough, the horse, my old horse, when I went out to my tree the other day, I asked to connect to my guides and them show me or reveal things to me around what I needed to see, and my old horse came through, bringing the horse energy. So again, like, it's helpful to remember, although we're used to this logical linear lens, we're really here in the work of magic, and that involves opening to spirit, opening to magic, to more being revealed, and being willing to be in the mystery of the feminine. And of course, other ways that we can work with this is through archetypal remedies. So this is very much, what we're offering in the Archetypal Apothecary Path. We work with the magical technology of archetypal remedies, which essentially are, I see, if we're like saying, all the women who are typically drawn to my medicine are witches. There's no getting around that. They're medicine women who are here to bring a deeper medicine to the world. And the witch, essentially, like, the way that I'm seeing this is like the witch has her own archetypal remedies, and that can be both energetically, like we work energetically with these archetypal remedies, calling in their spirits to show us what we need to see, a bit like an archetypal lens, like the witch, we can see what's there for us in the witch. Like, gold aurum as an essence is naturally abundant, powerful, sovereign. That's a remedy essence, an archetypal remedy essence that we can use as a mirror. Like, where do we resist abundance? Where do we resist our power? Where do we resist our sovereignty? Like, these are lenses, and there's a lot more depth to that. But these are lenses as an example of how we can work with archetypal remedies energetically as archetypes for our healing of our power. And that can also be, I've just seen, particularly around the LMs piece, I've just seen that I'm also here to guide women into an archetypal remedy creation process, like a potion making as well, which is super exciting. That was something that was channeled to me this week, and I was like really getting clear on, like, women are here for the magical tech, and that is energetic, but it's also physical. Like, we can make our own LMs. And so where was I? I was talking about archetypal remedies, wasn't I, as a way to harness our powers. So we can work with these remedies, like I've mentioned gold as a representation of sovereignty, And also Naja. Naja helps us to reclaim our feminine heart and true expression in a really powerful way. So Naja's another archetypal energy. Naja is the snake. It's very much a good one for alchemizing. Actually both, like although she's here to help us with the tyrant, of course, because the tyrant is the polar opposite of being helpless, Naja is also here for that as well. She's about true expression. And so we can work with the energies of these archetypes to help us heal our power. And of course, as I mentioned as well, like having a soul guide is also, like, for me, has been such the deep healing. But it's really all about personal choice, and what feels aligned for us in terms of like journeying alone or the collapsing time, and really going intensely focused on doing the deep work. So these are some of the ways that you can begin to work with reclaiming your power, and of course some of the great inquiries that have been kind of trickle fed through this episode. I think in terms of some other inquiries, I think some of the potent ones feel like, what resistance comes up for you when you think about a situation where you felt powerless? Like, what was your natural response? And what does power mean to you? Like, how would it feel to drop your armor and share truth from love? Does that feel vulnerable? And if so, it's likely you're doing it right. Because power from love is medicine from that vulnerability. I think that's pretty much all I've got to share. So I'm going to leave this episode here. And yeah, I would love to hear anything that came up for you. If you haven't yet joined our Secret Witch Society, I'd highly recommend it. It's a gorgeous community. We vote on all the episodes, and yeah, I'd love for you to share, like, what was your key takeaway from this episode, or you can share it in the comments if you're listening to this on YouTube, or join us on Instagram or TikTok and share. I would love to hear your takeaways. It's, again, like, I'm here for service. I would love to hear what's coming up for you as you listen to this, and what's coming alive for you. And yeah, other than that, I will see you next time. Another vulnerable episode from me. Here are my takeaways. Vulnerability is essential in owning our power. We have to be willing to do the work to own our own wounds and love ourselves there, so that we can express cleanly. The choice to own our power isn't about playing goddess, dressed up and wearing a crown. It's about owning our responsibility and going into the darkness to face aspects of ourselves we didn't want to face. And we can do this through the lens of sacred magical technology. The victim triangle is a helpful lens in sovereignty work, and something I use frequently, and it should be used with love. Love is the alchemical ingredient in owning our power. The coaching industry encourages ownership of power in a shadowy way, a rebellious way, which doesn't sit well, and it makes it hard for women to trust fully and be vulnerable. When we own our power from love, it opens us up to so much more potential, to heart-led service, which truly opens us to abundance. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.